Ethan glanced at his watch, a flicker of impatience in his gaze. Any minute now, Megan would be walking through the door. He'd left work early, a rare feat, just to get everything ready for her. After all, 10 years of marriage was no small milestone. From the kitchen came a quiet ding, signaling that the roast duck with apples was ready. His surprise centerpiece for the night. Ethan surveyed the candlelit table, satisfied with the arrangement. Just in time. Megan arrived nearly an hour late. "Oh, Ethan, love, I'm so sorry. Monica from accounting was having her birthday celebration, and I just couldn't duck out early," she said with a slight pout. Then her eyes brightened as she took in the scene. "Oh my gosh, did you do all this yourself? Look at you!" She kissed him, laughing, and they quickly took their seats at the cozy, intimate table he'd set. Later, they snuggled up together on the couch, half watching a film as Ethan gently twisted a lock of her hair around his finger. Her laugh, her energy, it was as vivid as the day they met, and he was struck by how little she'd changed. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" he murmured. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday, those first dates of ours." Megan chuckled. "Hard to forget. That night in the rain, I was soaked to the bone and ended up with a cold. And then you kept coming by with tea, soup, and oranges, insisting it was better than flowers," she teased, nudging him. They both laughed, the sound filling the small, warm room. Later that night, as they drifted off to sleep, Ethan wrapped her in his arms, grateful for every moment they'd shared. Spring came early that year, casting the town in shades of fresh green by mid-April. Megan had just left for a work trip, and Ethan, now on his own, strolled back to his car through streets scented with the warm promise of spring. It felt odd to be heading back to an empty apartment. Their home seemed quiet, empty without her. When he walked through the front door, he was met with a chaotic scene. In her rush, Megan had left an impressive trail of clothes, bags, and shoes across their bedroom, and even into the hallway. He laughed to himself. This was Megan in all her chaotic charm. Ethan turned on the TV, more for the comforting noise than anything, and got started on tidying up. He didn't mind doing things around the house. In fact, he rather liked taking care of their home. He could cook, clean, and do laundry without a second thought. Most of the housework fell to Megan, but he enjoyed surprising her now and then by having everything spotless when she returned. Today, the vase on the windowsill held fresh tulips he'd picked up just yesterday. He couldn't remember a time her favorite vase had been empty. His phone vibrated in his pocket, and he glanced at a message from Megan. "Ethan, I think I left my heels by the door, and my phone charger. Could you check?" He chuckled as he walked to the entryway, where the heels she'd forgotten sat waiting, elegant and unused. Dialing her number, he couldn't help but grin. Well, Miss Forgetful. What's the plan now?" "I'll just have to rough it in boots," she replied with a laugh. "Guess I'll be doing some shopping. Don't worry, love, I'll find a store, and I promise I won't forget the charger." They said their goodbyes with warm affection, and he set her shoes neatly on a shelf. The next day, Ethan couldn't reach her at all. Her phone was off. A hint of worry crept in, so he sent her a message asking her to call as soon as she could. She finally rang back that evening. Her video came on by accident, and she didn't seem to notice. Megan was wearing a bathrobe, her hair loose as she was preparing to shower. She waved a shopping bag with a grin, saying, "Bought the heels. You wouldn't believe the choices they have here. Oh, and I grabbed a new umbrella. They say there's rain in the forecast. It's a shame you're not here to see this." But Ethan wasn't paying attention to her words anymore. A shadowy figure crossed behind her, barely visible, before an arm extended to hand her a glass of wine. Another man stepped briefly into the frame, also in a bathrobe, looking straight into the camera. Ethan's heart pounded as the realization struck, memories flooding back. He'd seen this man's face in Megan's social media feed once, in a photo she'd dismissed, saying they were just childhood friends who'd reconnected online. A surge of emotion overwhelmed him. "You? How could?" The words failed him, slipping away. Megan's eyes went wide as she realized he could see her screen. Her voice turned cold, sharp. "Don't you dare come back here," she spat, then hurled her phone against the wall, severing the connection. Dazed, Ethan stumbled through the apartment, his mind reeling, his heart shattering. In a flash, he was out the door, racing to find her. The rain had started, painting the night in blurred, dark streaks as he sped down the empty roads. He didn't know what he would do when he found her, but he knew he couldn't stop. The city lights faded behind him, swallowed by the storm. Ethan knew exactly where Megan was staying. He knew he couldn't stop himself. He knew he should turn back, but stubbornly he pressed down on the gas, watching the fading evening light settle over the city. Driving through a small town and slowing down around a curve, he suddenly slammed on the brakes. He'd almost hit a woman who'd appeared right in his path. She stood there, leaning heavily on his car's hood, and his heart pounded, thinking, I hit her. I didn't stop in time. But in a flash, Ethan jumped out and shouted, Are you crazy? Are you trying to get yourself killed? As he reached her, she collapsed into his arms, whispering, Help me. I'm in labor. And then she fainted. Ethan froze, stunned. There he was, alone on a deserted road, holding a woman he didn't know, completely at a loss about what to do. But the confusion quickly gave way to an odd sense of determination. He gently shook her, tapped her cheeks, and soon she began to come around. Somehow, he managed to ease her into the back seat. Hold on. I'll get you to the hospital, he said, straining to hide his own uncertainty. How did you end up like this? Outside, a fierce wind picked up, and cold rain lashed against the car. Ethan realized his best option was to head back to his city, just 30 kilometers away. But not even 5 minutes into the drive, he heard a moan from the back seat. The baby's coming. What happened next was like something out of a movie. There, on that lonely country road, Ethan helped bring a baby boy into the world. Strangely, he didn't feel any panic. He was focused and surprisingly calm. Later, he would wonder where he'd found the composure. Him, a city guy with no clue about childbirth. But for now, he was caught up in the moment, wrapping the tiny newborn in his shirt before carefully driving them both to the hospital. It was well after midnight when Ethan finally returned home, exhausted, his mind spinning, yet inexplicably happy. He showered and then lay down on the couch in his living room, too wrapped up in the night's events to think about Megan. He'd always wanted kids. He envied his colleagues, who would talk about taking their families on picnics, visiting the zoo with their little ones, or just spending time together. His friend, Mr. Iverson, even went fishing with his grandkids. Ethan would listen, captivated, as Iverson shared stories of his big, loving family. But Megan wouldn't hear any of it. Oh, Ethan, we're still young. I'll give you a dozen kids if you want, just not yet. Let's enjoy life for ourselves first. Look at Liz. She's got 3, and now she can barely leave the house. We ran into each other at the mall once, and while I was shopping for a blouse, she was buying them toys. I got cosmetics. She got diapers. That's no life. She can't even treat herself to anything decent. You should have seen her grocery cart. She'd laugh it off, adding, But don't pout. I'll have kids, just not yet, okay? But the years passed, and that later never came. Ethan loved Megan, forgiving her whims time and time again. I forgave one too many times, he thought wryly, yet the image of the newborn flashed back to him, resting in his hands as he tried to wipe away that night's memories. The little boy had wriggled, whimpered, then let out a full cry as Ethan cleaned his face with a damp cloth and handed him to his mother. She held him close, and he drifted off to sleep, still thinking, strange, I don't even know her name. But somehow, I'd like to see her and her son again. Around 11 the next morning, the phone rang, pulling him from sleep. Disoriented, he took a few moments to figure out who was calling and what they wanted. Gradually, it all clicked into place. It was a nurse from the hospital. Sorry to call, but we kept your number just in case. It's the baby's mother. She's saying she wants to leave and leave the baby here. But surely you can't just leave a baby behind. You're adults. The nurse's voice was firm. She's not my wife, he muttered. So what? It doesn't matter. The baby didn't do anything wrong. He's a beautiful, healthy boy, your son. All right. I'll come down, he said, more to calm her down than anything. An hour later, Ethan stood in front of his unexpected companion from last night. Now, he knew her name. She was called Monica. Ethan could barely take his eyes off Monica, who now looked so different in the daylight. She was slender, not particularly tall, with striking green eyes and a soft face that, though not conventionally beautiful, held a quiet charm of its own. She seemed shy under his gaze, her face shadowed with exhaustion and framed by the faintest circles beneath her eyes. Thank you, Ethan, she whispered. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened to us. Her voice broke off as she looked down. Why are you thinking of leaving your son, Monica? He asked, the worry unmistakable in his voice. Monica's lips quivered. I don't want to, she murmured. But I have nowhere to go. I don't know how I can survive with him on my own. Tears welled in her eyes as she began to speak, the words tumbling out, hesitant but desperate. He didn't want the baby, but I did. So I got pregnant anyway. It wasn't easy. I was in and out of the hospital most of the time. Finally, it seemed he was starting to accept the idea, even talking about us as a family. He found a house, said it would be better for the baby, but we had to sell my apartment to afford it. When he brought the papers to the hospital, I trusted him and signed. I thought he was planning a future for us. But when I finally went to see him, he wouldn't even let me in. He already had someone else there, in our house. He'd put everything in his name, and I was left with nothing. She choked on the last word and, defeated, looked away. Ethan sat silently, absorbing her story, then finally rose with quiet resolve. Monica, you're staying with me. There's no reason for you or your son to be alone. She gazed at him with tentative hope, nodded, and brushed away her tears. Spring had fully blossomed, brightening the city streets. Each day, Ethan saw Monica pushing a stroller through the courtyard, a peaceful smile on her face as she watched her little one. And gradually, he realized something unspoken had started to grow between them. Monica's heart ached with a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to admit, that Ethan was quickly becoming her anchor, her home. He was the man she'd once only dreamed of. She sighed softly to herself. She could see him walking up from work, and with a flutter in her chest, she headed inside to warm up lunch. She knew he'd filed for divorce, and though she felt a pang of sorrow for his loss, there was a warmth, a tenderness, for him that had begun to fill her soul. One evening, their peaceful routine was broken by the doorbell. Ethan opened it to find Megan standing there. Ethan, I want to come back. Please, forgive me, she whispered. Ethan's face softened with compassion, but also certainty. I already forgave you, Megan, he replied. But that part of my life ended when I met Monica. Goodbye, Megan. I hope you find happiness. Confused and wounded, she protested. But Ethan, we were happy together once, weren't we? What I had with Daniel meant nothing, I swear. I left him long ago. It's only you I need. Ethan shook his head, resolute. No, Megan. What I need now is her. He gently took Monica's hand as she stepped forward from the kitchen. You see, Megan, things can't be undone. I'm in love with her. Crushed, Megan slowly turned and left, her head bowed, her steps hollow with regret. Monica looked up at Ethan, her eyes questioning, tentative. Is it true? She asked, her voice soft with disbelief. He pulled her into his arms and smiled. Yes, Monica, you're everything I could ever want. He held her close and whispered, Marry me. I love you more than anything. Her heart soared as she returned his embrace. I love you too, Ethan, she whispered, eyes bright with joy. Come on, he said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I think our son is calling us, probably a bit hungry. Laughing, they walked hand in hand to the crib, where their little boy greeted them with a tiny, adoring smile. 2 years later, Ethan found himself back at the hospital, proudly carrying not one but 2 tiny bundles in his arms. Their son, now a lively little boy, bounced beside him, jumping up to catch a glimpse of his baby sisters. Life had taken them on an unexpected journey, but here, at last, they had found home. That's how the story ends, friends. Join the conversation below and share your thoughts on this story. If you found it captivating, share the link with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story that will make your heart race. Your support inspires us to create more tales. Take care and see you next time.